When a guy gets to be my age, he likes to think of himself as living history. He has seen the great events of a lifetime that you younger people only read about in books. On the other hand, you may look at us as talking fossils, gabbing on about nonsense that has nothing to do with you. I'd like to take the first alternative today and talk about sex, something that you young people think you're experts on and that we have forgotten about, which isn't true. And in particular, I'd like to talk about how perceptions of sex have changed over the course of my life. I was born in World War II, your great patriotic war. And I grew up in the immediate post-war years, the 40s and the 50s. That was a time when the soldiers returned from victory in Europe and Japan. They had fought a tough fight. Before that, they had lived through a Great Depression, and they were ready to get on with life. They got married and raised families. The result was the baby boomers, the biggest generation in American history. Also the biggest in European history, following a few years later. And the values of that time favored family and children. Look at the popular music. I've sung some of this to you before. Love and marriage, love and marriage, go together like a horse and carriage. That was the spirit of the time. Get married, stay married, raise children. Now there were a few little clouds on the horizon back in the 1950s. There was Playboy magazine, which was talking about sex, not about getting married. And there was Christine Jorgensen, the world's first transsexual operation. And there was Allen Ginsberg, the great beat poet, starting the North American Man-Boy Love Association. Not exactly a family man, but those were off in the distance. They didn't affect us. When I graduated from high school in 1960, the guys who didn't go on to college pretty much got married right then and there, and their great-grandparents, or at least grandparents by now. Something else happened to those of us who went to college. The most tumultuous few years in American history. We had the drug revolution, the sexual revolution, and the anti-war, the anti-government revolution. The sexual revolution came on like a storm. It was the birth control pill in 1961, Helen Gurley Brown's Sex and the Single Girl, a bestseller of 1962, The Feminine Mystique, Betty Friedan's classic in 1963, turned everything on its head. And whereas we boys in high school had whispered about which girls might do it, and we certainly knew that we weren't doing it ourselves, we didn't know anything about sex. Sex was the sacred thing that was going to happen someday when we got married. And we wanted to get married pretty soon with that in mind. All of that went away. All of that changed. By the early 60s, it was just call me angel of the morning, or if you can't be with the one you love, love the one you're with. Here's my own experience. I went to a progressive college. Here's the t-shirt, Reed College. It says communism, atheism, and free love. That was kind of the credo of the 1960s. I was at a dance at Reed College in 1962, and this girl said, would I like to go home with her? I was, what? Sex, this great thing. that I was going to spend a lifetime waiting for until I got married. She's going to offer it just like that? I didn't know what to say. I did say yes. But when she found out that I lived a kilometer away, she said, forget about it. I was shocked again. This sort of shock just kept on coming. A couple years later, down in Berkeley, I was sitting on my front porch with my friend David Shore, and this girl, not a bad-looking girl, came bopping up and asked if we'd like to have sex. I looked at her, kind of like the way I look at emails from Nigerian princes offering me $1 million. I said, yeah, I don't think so. But David took her up, and it went okay. That was the 1960s. It was crazy. In 1967, I lived in the Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco, the epicenter of where it was all happening. And I had 2 young girl cousins who moved there as well. They were 10 and 12 years younger than me, born in the 50s. These 2 girls were swept up in the moment of free love. They had 5 children by 5 different men. One of the children told me the only way he knew who his father was that he wasn't black. These 5 children have not had easy lives. This guy I just mentioned died at 48. The mothers are both more than 10 years dead. It was not a good experience, this sexual revolution. Okay, now what else came? Well, the gay pride stuff started. Now, I came from San Francisco. I had known homosexuals all my life. My mother told me later that my babysitters were gay. It was no big deal. We were tolerant. We accepted gays for what they were. But what changed with the Stonewall riots in the 60s and 70s was that it was no longer okay to be gay. It was wonderful to be gay. And if we were salaaming before the gays, oh, you're gay, that's wonderful. And we had gay singers like Elton John. Oh, that's wonderful, that's so cool. And we ordinary people were kind of like, also rans. And that happened, the gay agenda got pushed further and further, and now it's transsexuals. All of a sudden the gays are yesterday's news, and we're talking about transsexuals. Slamming before the homosexuals. And we have homosexuals appearing on Eurovision, a bearded lady or something who wins the contest. And that's where it's going. So all of that's cool. And guys like me are no longer cool. And families are no longer cool. What else has happened here is that we men have been continuing to lose ground. The women said, we want to in at the workplace. We want jobs like you have. And we looked at them and said, you want jobs like we have? Pajausta, come on in. And we very graciously moved aside. So women came into the workplace. And women changed the workplace rather radically. You could no longer talk like men in the workplace. You had to be nice and gentle, which made the workplace a little bit less pleasant, made the army a little bit less masculine, made the police force a little less masculine, and so on, but we put up with that. And the women came in and they took over the workplace and they started ranting about equal pay for equal and so and so and so, and the men kept giving ground. Meanwhile, the women who were working were finding they were having a hard time watching the kids, so they said, hey, husband, why don't you stay home and watch the kids? Some guys tried that. It peaked about 30 years ago. It turns out that men are not very good mothers. The children don't go running, daddy, 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 ah. They don't go running to daddy like that. And the daddies didn't particularly like it, and the women didn't respect the men who did that. It didn't work out. So the women took everything that was men's, and the men were left with just about nothing. except video games and pornography, as you know. So that's what's happened. Okay, now back to the idea of this sexual revolution. The women found that men were surprisingly enthusiastic about the sexual revolution. Free sex? Duh, why not? In the 1970s and 1980s, the women started to feel a little used. They'd say, okay, let's go home. The guy would say, sure, let's do it. And then the woman would think the next morning, that wasn't such a good idea. And she might turn around and say, it was such a bad idea, maybe it wasn't my idea, maybe it was his idea, maybe he raped me. So men started to get accused of rape. Campus rape was all the big talk. Take back the night, and so on. That was the title of a book. So all of a sudden, this thing that was free, that men were enjoying, wasn't so free anymore. It was dangerous. And women were being taught that men were evil predators, not to have anything to do with them. So women were more scared of men, and men were more scared of women. And who liked this? The homosexuals loved it, because more girls for the lesbians and more guys for the homosexuals. No problems. And homosexuality flourished. A quarter of the incoming freshmen at Harvard and Brown universities call themselves gay, or something like that. It's weird. Other things changed too. It turned out that divorce changed. It became easier and easier for women to get divorces. Women could initiate divorces. They initiate more than 2/3 of them. And when a woman initiates the divorce, she almost invariably gets custody of the children. And there's a rule in American divorce when it comes to property. Half of what's ours is mine, and half of what's his is mine. In other words, the women get the best of it. I've been through this, I can testify. So men started to say, gee, what about this marriage business? Why would I do that? And men are simply not getting married. So women are saying they don't want to get married because they want to have careers, and men are saying they don't want to get married because it's dangerous. And you know what? People are not getting married. The result is, even before COVID-19, the birth rate had plummeted. People like us, the world over, are dying out. We are not reproducing ourselves. This is not only people like us, there's also Japanese, Chinese, Koreans, and pretty much it's happening all over. People are simply not having kids. They're scared to. They don't want to. And so that I'll conclude with this message from a fossil who I think I'm going to leave behind some descendants, and that's, to me, a good thing. And if you, when you get to be my age, don't want to become an extinct fossil, just a museum piece talking about how, to be talked about in the context of how crazy life was in the 2020s, I would suggest that you look at all of this nonsense that you've been taught. Look at all this nonsense that's gone down in the past couple or 3 decades, and divorce yourself from it and go back to your grandparents' values. Say, marriage was a good thing, family was a good thing, and that's what brought you here. And just forget all of this modern stuff which has been invented, and get back with real life. Get married and have children. Set a new trend. Madam Toastmaster.